Berlin, Leipzig, Dresden, Rostock, Brandenburg. Today, these names sound unmistakably German. But look beneath the modern map, and another Germany begins to appear. A Germany written in names. Names of cities, villages, rivers, entire regions. And many of those names are not German at all. They are Slavic. We know that large parts of what is now Eastern Germany were once inhabited by Slavic peoples. That is not the mystery. The mystery is how much of Germany was once Slavic. And perhaps an even more interesting question, how much of that Slavic world is still hiding in plain sight? To find out, we don't need archaeology. We only need a map, the map beneath Germany. Let's begin with Leipzig. Its name goes back to the Slavic, Lipsk. Behind Lipsk is Lipa, the Slavic word for linden tree. So, beneath modern Leipzig, an old Slavic tree is still hiding. Then, Dresden. Its name goes back to Slavic, Dresdjani. The name is generally associated with people inhabiting a marshy or wooded landscape. Then travel north to Rostock. Its name goes back to Slavic, Rostock, a word associated with the dividing or spreading of water into different channels. And look where Rostock stands, on the river Warnow, close to where the river opens toward the Baltic. The name described the landscape. The landscape remained. And so did the name. Then, Lübeck. Behind Lübeck lies the older Slavic settlement, Lubici. And this name may sound surprisingly familiar to Slavic ears. Compare it with the Serbian and South Slavic female name, Ljubica. The resemblance is striking. Both belong to the Slavic Lüb word family, connected with love, dear, beloved. The city of Lübeck itself records a Slavic fortification at Old Lübeck as early as 819, while Lübce appears in written history in 1072. And then Brandenburg. Behind modern Brandenburg stands another older Slavic world. In Slavic tradition, the city is known as Brandybor. And once again, to a Slavic ear, the name sounds remarkably familiar. Compare it with Slavic personal names such as Branibor, Branislav, Borislav. The first element, Bran, belongs to a Slavic word family associated with defending, protecting. Combined with the suffix bor, the name suggests a defended place, perhaps a fortress. So already we have Leipzig, Dresden, Rostock, Lübeck, and Brandenburg. But none of them is the real surprise, because now we come to Berlin. Berlin before Berlin. Even the name Berlin is generally considered to be of Slavic, specifically Palabian origin. Its reconstructed Old Palabian forms are Berlin, Berlin. They have been connected with the Palabian root. Burl, meaning swamp, marsh. Together with the Slavic suffix in, the name has been interpreted approximately as a place in marshy land. And geographically, that makes remarkable sense. Berlin developed among rivers, wetlands, and marshy ground. So before Berlin became the capital of Germany, its very name was already describing the landscape in a Slavic language. But Berlin itself is not the real surprise. Open the map of Berlin, and suddenly we encounter Pankow, Treptow, Köpenick, Spandau, Marzahn, Rudow, Gotov, Karov, Malchov, Kladow, Buckow. These aren't villages somewhere near Poland. They are districts and localities of Berlin. Take Buckow. Behind it stands the Slavic buk, meaning beech tree, or Altglanica. Its older form, Glinik, is connected with glina, meaning clay. Then Kladow, connected with the Slavic klada, a log or tree trunk. And Köpenick. Medieval forms include a word, Köpenick, from the Slavic root kop, to dig or heap up, probably referring to a mound or raised place. another name belonging to the Old Slavic linguistic landscape of the Berlin region. Suddenly, Berlin no longer looks like one German city with an unusual Slavic name. It looks like a city built inside an older Slavic map. But leave Berlin, and the pattern becomes much larger. A part of Germany that doesn't sound German. Welcome to Lusatia. Here we find names such as Bela, white, Bukovka, from Buk, beach, Dobravka, from Dub, oak, and Dubrava, woodland or oak grove, Yasa, Yasen, ash tree, Yaworka, Yavor, maple, Mokrov, from Mokr, mokr, wet, Pesky, connected with the Slavic word for sand, Rudnica, from the root rud, associated with or, Tornov, from trn, thorn, verba, willow. So we have beech, oak, ash, maple, water, sand, or thorn, willow. An entire landscape described through Slavic vocabulary. But now comes the detail that changes the story. Because the people who preserved this linguistic world never completely disappeared. The Slavs who never left Germany. In English, they are usually called the Sorbs. They are a West Slavic people living primarily in Lusatia, and they still live there today. They are officially recognized as an autochthonous national minority in Germany. Their languages survived, their culture survived, and most interestingly, their name survived. The Germans call them Sorbian, but in Upper Sorbian, they call themselves Serbia, and in Lower Sorbian, Serby. We have Serbia, Serby, which immediately raises an obvious question. What is the historical relationship between these Central European Sorbs and the Serbs of the Balkans? Today, they are distinct peoples whose histories developed separately over many centuries. Modern authors caution that we shouldn't simply equate one modern population with another. But the similarity is not merely an accident of English spelling. Serbia, Serby, and historical forms of the Sorbian ethnonym belong to the same Old Slavic name family as Serb. But what this tells us about the people themselves is much harder to say. And this question matters far beyond the similarity of two names. Because if Sorbs and Balkan Serbs were once part of a broader connected population, we would be looking not merely at a Slavic past of Eastern Germany, but at traces of a Slavic world stretching across much of Central Europe. Can people disappear from a map? Today, Central European Sorbs and Balkan Serbs are separated by hundreds of kilometers. But ethnic maps can change extraordinarily quickly. We don't even have to go back to the Middle Ages. In 1991, more than 580,000 Serbs lived in Croatia. 30 years later, the Croatian census recorded roughly 124,000. Whatever interpretation we give to the historical events behind those numbers, the geographical result is obvious. A population map can change dramatically within one generation. Now, imagine the same process is over. 500 years, 800 years, 1,000 years. War, migration and assimilation, language shift, new borders, new identities. Populations can become fragmented. Languages can disappear. And people don't even have to physically disappear. They can remain while their language and identity change. Does this prove that the Sorbs of Germany and Serbs of the Balkans once formed one continuous population? Maybe. But it demonstrates something important. The distance between them today cannot tell us how they were distributed 1,000 years ago. And Germany itself gives us the evidence. Today's Sorbian homeland is small, but according to the government of Brandenburg, the ancestors of today's Sorbs belong to Slavic populations occupying a much broader territory between the Oder and Elbe Saale, extending from the Baltic toward the central German highlands. The same official account describes the later contraction of the Sorbian settlement area under centuries of German linguistic and cultural dominance. So, the tiny Sorbian area we see today is a remnant, not the original extent. And that brings us to something even more intriguing. Because some German place names may preserve not merely Slavic words, but the name of the people themselves. Across Germany, we encounter names such as Zerbst, Serbic, Serba, Serben, Serbitz, Sorbau, Sorbitz. But look closely at Serbic. In 961, its name was recorded as Serbici. Historical linguists reconstruct the underlying Slavic form as Serbici. And this is not isolated. Nearby, Zerbitz appears in medieval forms associated with Serbovici and Serbici. The geographical distribution of such names has been interpreted by historical linguists as evidence for the wider spread of the Serb ethnonym. And then, medieval history gives us another remarkable name. Limes Sorabicus. During the early Middle Ages, Frankish sources referred to a frontier associated with the Sorbs as Limes Sorabicus. Notice the name, not Limes Slavicus, but Limes Sorabicus, a frontier described through the name of the Sorbs. This does not mean that every Slav beyond that frontier was a Sorb. Medieval political terminology cannot simply be converted into modern ethnic maps. But it does tell us something important. The name Sorb, Serb, belonged to a significant political and geographical reality in medieval Central Europe, and that is why the possible Sorb-Serb connection matters so much. If these names preserve traces of a once more widely connected population, then the question is no longer simply how much of Germany was once Slavic, but whether a much larger part of Central Europe once belonged to the same Slavic continuum. So, now our original question has changed. It is no longer simply, why are there Slavic names in Germany? We know why. The more interesting question is, how large was this Slavic world? The people changed, the map remembered. Place names cannot tell us what percentage of modern Germans descend from Slavic-speaking populations. They cannot give us a medieval census. But they can tell us something extraordinarily important, and that is where a language once lived. People can change language. They can change identity. They can be assimilated into another population, but geographical names often survive them. Think about what we've just seen. Lipsk, Dresden, Rostock, Ljubice, Brandenburg, Berlin, Bukov, Dubravka, Jasern, Rudnica, Tornov. And finally, Serbic, Sorbitz, Serbici. One name proves very little, but when names repeat across cities, villages, rivers, and entire regions, we are no longer looking at isolated curiosities. We are looking at a linguistic landscape. So, how Slavic is Germany? If the question means, is modern Germany a Slavic country? Obviously not. But if we ask, how much Slavic history lies beneath modern Germany? The answer becomes much more interesting, because it survives. In Berlin, in Leipzig, in Dresden, in Brandenburg, across Lusatia, in hundreds of geographical names, and in the Sorbian people themselves. And perhaps the biggest question is still unanswered. What exactly is the historical relationship between Sorbs, Serbici, and the name Serb in southeastern Europe? Were these populations once more closely connected? Did the name once cover a much larger geographical world? And how much of that world disappeared not because the people vanished, but because their language and identity changed? Those questions deserve an episode of their own. But one thing is already visible. You don't need to excavate a medieval settlement to find the forgotten Slavic past of Germany. You can read it on the map. The people changed, the states changed, the languages changed, but the map remembered. So open a map of Germany, look at the names, and ask yourself, how Slavic is Germany? But Germany is only part of the story. Click the link on your screen to discover another chapter of Europe's forgotten Slavic past. Write your opinion in the comments. Subscribe, follow, and like. Thank you for watching the Slighthouse.